Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Lantern's Quest. We are continuing our series exploring A Sketchbook of Christ, looking at the Gospel of Mark, and this is episode 32 of that series. And so we're glad that you are either joining us live or you're watching this at a later time. If this is your first time tuning in to this series, I encourage you to go to the Bradford Christian College YouTube channel. Click on playlists. You will find the Lantern's Quest playlist, and you can find previous episodes if you'd like to catch up with us where we're at. We are in Mark chapter 9, so this will be a good opportunity for you to grab a Bible and open to Mark chapter 9 so that you can be prepared to follow along. While you're doing that, I'm going to ask David Barrett if he might want to update us on the conference that's coming up end of next week. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just over a week away. The 2026 Rocky Mountain Biblical Worldview Conference on Defending the Declaration. It's a way of celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the significance of that document. We'll also be looking at the Christian worldview that it was operating at the time behind the drafting and wording and of the document, as well as other decisions that the founders were making at the time. It's, I think, something that's significant that we as Americans need to cherish of what the Lord has done in our history. And we'll be joined by Lieutenant Colonel John Eismo from Montgomery, Alabama, a constitutional attorney. Also, Pastor Lucas Baumbach here on the program will be providing other insights related to it concerning the influence of Presbyterianism and get it right here, John Witherspoon. And I'll be giving a couple of presentations as well. The conference is free. Go to biblicalworldviewconference.com to see the schedule and to register. If you are too far away to attend and want to tune in, drop me a line at david@biblicalview.com, and we'll make sure you get the Zoom link for attending in that fashion. So yeah, coming up in a week and a half.
But the better option is to come because there's food.
There's food for the body and food for the soul. We've got we'll have a lot of books.
Oh yeah, all the books
for this.
Yeah.
Lots
of good, and the speakers usually have books too, right?
So yeah, often will bring other materials of their personal production. I'm done. Are you still there, Tim?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Sorry. I was having a good conversation with myself. But anyway, I was just saying that there is a link in the description below that can be used to access that website that you mentioned, and people can get the information there. And one way or another, you'll want to be attending that, whether it's in person or virtually. And David, again, videos will be available after the event on the Wellsprings Church website or YouTube channel, right?
YouTube channel, Wellsprings Church YouTube channel. That is right.
Okay. And Pastor Lucas, you will be speaking at that event on John Witherspoon. Anything else you want to, you can talk about that or anything else you want to bring up that's happening for you?
I'm thrilled to talk about it, but I think that it's a PowerPoint presentation, so there's going to be a lot of visuals, which I cannot convey over even this medium, even though it's a wonderful medium. So yeah, come and enjoy the conference. I'll be one of the presenters, and John Eismo is great. He is he's actually also doing something Thursday night at the Zion Lutheran in Nampa. So if you're not available Friday, Saturday, but you're available Thursday, that's another opportunity. I think he's doing that at 6:30. The school is hosting him there, so that's another great opportunity.
All right, excellent. Okay, so tonight we want to pick up in Mark chapter 9, or about, well, I guess I was going to say halfway through the chapter, but I don't think it's quite halfway. But we'll be starting at verse 14 tonight. And just as a reminder of what's happened in Mark chapter 9 to this point, I guess two events. Did I say verse? Yeah, 14. Okay.
14.
What's happened is the Transfiguration, Elijah and Moses appearing with Jesus, Peter, James, and John witnessing that, and then they made their way down, and there was some teaching that Jesus was able to give to Peter, James, and John on the way down the mountain. And so in verse 14, we are now at that point where Jesus and Peter, James, and John are joining the other disciples, I guess, at the bottom of the mountain. So we'll start reading at verse 14, and let's see. Yeah, I'll stop somewhere here. So let's start at verse 14. And when he came to his disciples, the he here is Jesus, Jesus saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes questioning with them. And immediately all the people, when they beheld Jesus, were greatly amazed, and running to him, saluted him. And Jesus asked the scribes, "What question you with them?" And one of the multitude answered and said, "Master, I have brought to you my son who has a dumb spirit. And wherever he takes him, he tears him, and he foams and gnashes with his teeth and pines away. And I spoke to your disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not." Jesus answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him to me." And they brought him to him. So this would be the boy to Jesus. And when Jesus saw him, immediately the spirit tore the boy, and he fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. And he asked his father, Jesus asking the father of the boy, "How long is it since this came to him?" And the father said, "From a child, and often it has cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." All right, so there's more to the story. I'm going to stop there because there's plenty to consider at this point. So it sounds like as Jesus, James, Peter, and John approach the other disciples, he is noticing the scribes questioning the disciples about something. And he asks the scribes what it is that they're questioning about. And it says one of the multitude. So to me, that sounds like not necessarily a scribe answering Jesus, but, well, I guess it's the father of the boy from what is said. But Lucas, why don't you get us started here with verse 14 and what we see happening. And here again, we have one of those questions. Mark, we've talked about it before, these questions that show up in various chapters that are questions that we want to focus on because I think the answers to those questions become helpful in understanding who Jesus is. But I'll stop. You go ahead.
Yeah, so this story about the healing of the boy, it doesn't actually get started right away. There's a bit of a setup here, a bit of a setting, and we see here that there is, like there has been through most of the chapters, a multitude gathering around Jesus, and there is a unique character to what's going on here, is that there are scribes who are disputing with the disciples. So remember, Jesus was on the mountain with the great three disciples, Peter, James, and John, the big three, as I call them. And so they get back from this mountaintop experience. Jesus's face is glowing, and this scene unfolds in front of them. It's kind of a chaotic scene where the multitudes, the scribes and the disciples are all in a dither. And so Jesus shows up, and what do we see here but that Jesus is transfigured. I mean, literally metamorphosized, right? That there's something different, special, changed, perhaps. It says all the people were greatly amazed when they saw him. So clearly the outward manifestation of the transfiguration is still visible. And everybody's running to greet Jesus, even though the scribes are fighting with the disciples. There's a new attraction, and this is how it should be. And whether it's in religion and the debates we have, or in between our denominations, our different theologies, or whether it's the political world, which is also very much alive in this day. When Jesus shows up, we should really forget about everything and just run to Jesus. That's what we should do every day. So what a wonderful picture, running to Jesus, greeting Jesus. He's the main thing. Jesus is really the main thing here. And so Jesus, in his characteristic fashion, is way of having just sort of simple conversation. He says, "So what are you guys talking about? What are you discussing with them?" And he actually addresses that to the scribes, because the scribes would be the intellectual leaders of the day, probably the most biblically literate, and they're the kind of people that they're kind of the answer guys, right? So he could ask the disciples what they're saying, but Jesus goes right to the scribes. So then you see a transition in verse 17 to a different topic, perhaps. And this may be actually, I don't know that it's one of these Markan sandwiches, but it kind of feels like that at this moment, where you have sort of one story seemingly going on, and then it seems to transition. So how's that for an opening?
Excellent. So David, if you want to pick up at that point, maybe you have something to add to what Lucas has already presented there. But
okay. Yeah. I would just say that it might have been because of Jesus' face that they were amazed, but Jesus had instructed his disciples to not tell anybody about what had happened. So it may have been another reason. They didn't expect him to show up. He was up on the mountain and this thing's going on. Certainly if his face was shining, it'd be difficult to talk about why his face was shining. So I don't know. I'm not really settled on that part, but they certainly were amazed and ran to him, which Lucas rightly emphasized there, the significance of that. There is a dispute going on between the scribes and the disciples. In fact, one of the translations uses the word arguing. What they were in a dispute and they were in argument, which is a potential defining of that Greek there. And he asked the scribes, "What are you disputing, arguing with my disciples?" With them. And that, I think, was a role of the one who's the leader of the disciples. Disciples, I'm sure, were not equipped to handle whatever the confrontation was. coming from the scribes, and Jesus steps in and addresses them directly. And then somebody in the crowd is the one who brings up what is going on, and it appears it's the father, like you said. Mark says one in the crowd, but he says, "Teacher, I brought my son to them," and he is apparently possessed. A mute spirit is what it says there, and I don't doubt that. I mean, the child didn't speak, but the spirit caused a lot of bodily contortions to happen. And so Matthew uses a word that we would think of in terms of more of an epileptic type of response. But I'm careful in saying that. I don't think we should jump to some conclusion that epilepsy is, caused by demons. Epilepsy certainly is a physical disorder that some people have that is very difficult to deal with, and it's not what is going on here. They're talking about the type of response that the child had, or the demon caused the child to have. And it's tremendously sad and dramatic what goes on here as far as what it caused the child to do. And that, as Lucas says, kind of setting up a background here to this. And instead of Jesus immediately healing the child, it's interesting here in the book of Mark, which is usually so fast and a little more cryptic than the other gospels, he takes time to elaborate this story like the other gospels do. And Jesus' response, I don't know how far I was supposed to go, but getting to verse 19, it's a very interesting response to Jesus' awareness. He probably was pretty aware before that, but the awareness of the situation of the father bringing this child to his own disciples and they not having the faith required for casting out the demon. And his response sounds, if we were to give it a human emotion to it, exasperating.
Well, let's talk about that verse 19. Because I think if I'm just reading this, like I might read a story, if I read that statement by one of the characters in the story, probably I do attribute exasperation or frustration to that statement. Is that what we should attribute to it? Or do we have anything that would suggest there's something else, some other emotion there? Lucas, maybe if you want to grab hold of verse 19 and talk about that a bit.
Yeah. Well, it becomes clear kind of in the unveiling of the events that possibly the dispute was over this child in the first place. And the scribes may have been pouncing on the disciples because of their apparent inability. In verse 19, it says they brought him to him. Actually, it says in verse 18, I spoke to your disciples, they could not cast it out, that they should cast it out, but they could not. So again, the father explains to Jesus, I brought this kid to your disciples to get rid of this spirit, this mute spirit, as it's called. And there's other things that are happening. Obviously, he's being convulsed as if he has epilepsy. Whether it's epilepsy or not, I don't think it's like epilepsy, I think, is kind of the point that we want to take away. Not that he has epilepsy. We certainly don't have the diagnosis of what we would call epilepsy today. But in verse 19, he is responding to this man and jumping in, of course, to what looks like it might be the original dispute in the first place. The disciples kind of on their heels. There's some discussion about why they are unable to do what they're supposed to be able to do. Jesus authorized them to do baptisms. He authorized them to exorcise demons. Why are they unable to do what they're supposed to do? And the scribes, probably their first answer is because these guys are illegitimate. This new Christ following cult is illegitimate. Probably the same attitude that the Jews have today is what we can see in the hearts of these scribes. So he answers, "O faithless generation," and which is an interesting way to respond. And who's he talking to? Well, he's talking to not just the man, but he's talking to the whole multitude, a group of people here, scribes. Can we say that he's referring to the disciples and he's excoriating his own disciples? That might be actually a bit of a stretch because there are multiple different groups of people here. Probably is talking more about the scribes. But then he adds, how long will I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Whether he's talking to the disciples or he's talking to the multitude or both, I think you could go either way, but probably more likely he's talking to the multitude. Everybody all together, that there's only going to be so long that Christ in power can walk on the earth. Certainly he's foretold his death, and so that's one limiting factor. The main limiting factor is that he's not going to be with us forever on the earth. So how long shall I bear with you is an interesting question that Jesus asks. And the answer to that is that he's long suffering, and he knows that. But I think that it probably goes better in understanding with the previous question. How long am I going to be with you? I can't bear all of your sufferings. I can't stay here in perpetuity. Like, you guys have to pick up this ministry. In that sense, he would be talking to the disciples. How long shall I bear with you? In that sense, he's probably talking more with the multitude, bearing their sufferings, bearing their sorrows. So then they brought him to Jesus, expecting, of course, the Lord of this religion, this Christian religion, Christianity, budding Christianity, that the man himself can complete what his disciples could not. And it seems like a reasonable expectation that they would bring him to Jesus. And he saw him, the spirit convulsed, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. Just a really exciting display of what has been going on. The poor child suffering this way. The father besides himself. You could just imagine being the father of this child. And Jesus certainly is going to be moved by compassion. We're going to see. But this is a pitiful picture playing out right in front of Jesus. Now, keep in mind, if he was a charlatan, most healing ministries, I in my opinion, probably historically, have been frauds. People pretending like they have a broken leg, and then for money pretending like they're healed. As soon as the guy touches them. But in this case, the proof is positive. Jesus is Lord. He's Almighty. He's the King of his creation. He can calm the winds of the sea. He can calm the spirits and exorcise demons. So
Okay.
it's we have some more work to do, but that's a
All
good
right.
start.
So David, you might have some things you want to say about those verses as well. One thing that jumps into my mind, and you may or may not have a comment about this, when I read at verse 19, and how long shall I suffer you, or as Lucas read it, how long shall I bear with you? What comes to my mind is what God says leading into the flood when he says, my spirit will not strive with you forever, or something to that effect, right? I mean, it's like this can't go on this way. This won't go on this way. I don't know if there's any connection there, but that's just something that comes to my mind as I read that. And so now I'll just be quiet and you go ahead and pick up with these verses. And
Well, I think you ought to elaborate on that there, Tim. No. Yeah. I think the expression, "oh, faithless generation," helps us capture that he's saying it just out to the people. He's not directly calling out his disciples, though I do think he wants them to hear that as well. And he's talking about, the crowd, the people that are there. And I don't know. I think it's all right to give Jesus some human emotion here. Um, he knows his time is coming to a close. Um, he maybe doesn't know exactly. Well, he probably does. I don't know if he knows exactly how much more time he has, but he knows the time he's had with his disciples, the work he's done, the manifestation of who he is, and where they're headed in terms of his messianic mission. So I guess I don't have a difficulty with some exasperation. He will say it to his disciples at times. I don't know, remember that Mark has it recorded, but the Gospels record where he will tell his disciples when they're like they were fearful on the boat in the storm. Oh, ye of little faith, and he'll question them, and there'll be an admonition and rebuke in a sense in that way. What I think we need to keep in mind here is that there was a time in his ministry with his disciples that he sent them out and they cast out demons and they healed the sick and they came back like, I can't believe what we were able to do. And that may be part of what's behind Jesus reacting this way in their failure here, because as we move along, we're going to come to a point where the disciples are going to ask him, why couldn't we do it? In other words, they tried, they thought they could, and they couldn't. And that's kind of jumping a few verses down the road. But they knew that they had done it before, and they're going to get some instruction, which I think is very key to some things here. And so Jesus might be even using this expression here to set them up to desire more in terms of what's needed in their life to be used by God in this way. But the other side of it is the Father here. And, this demonic spirit has manifested himself, and as Lucas said, in a very, you used exciting, I guess that would be in the sense of, wow, look what's happening type of thing here. And Jesus doesn't go after the demon right away. He turns to the Father and says, how long has this been happening to him? And, that may be a testing of the Father's faith. It may also be bringing out the awareness that this is, in a sense, almost been this child's life, even making it more significant in terms of the healing here. It's not like, oh, well, yesterday this happened to him and now you got healed. Maybe it wasn't all that significant. No, this has been going on. It's been a dramatic part of this child's life almost from the beginning, it seems. And so I think there's a couple things going on there as far as Jesus, the reason he's, more methodically approaching this healing.
Okay, so this is where I want to venture into some speculation, and have you to set me correct on what I think about as I read this, right? So if we think about the story that's going on, it was just in the previous chapter, where we saw that Jesus instructed the disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer and die. And Peter's response was to rebuke Jesus, right? To say, let that not be. And Jesus, I guess, rebukes Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan." And Jesus recognized that in that moment, Satan was using Peter as an instrument of temptation away from his mission, right? Do something other than go to Jerusalem and die. Now, when we come to this point, we've never read, we read about the demon possessed guy and the Gadarenes, and there was some description of what he was like under that possession. Well, I shouldn't say some. I mean, there was description of what he was like under that possession, but it certainly wasn't like this. We didn't read that he was being thrown into the fire or thrown into the water, to this extent. And so I'm just of a mind that once again we have Satan bringing something up that's intended to try to divert Jesus from his mission. And a reason that I say that is because of the apparent emotion that comes through in verse 19 from Jesus. Like this circumstance is to an extent insufferable for him. And I say that cautiously because we know he is our Lord and Savior, and he can do that which the Father has called him to do. He has done that, right? But that's all right. I'll stop there, and you can speculate on my speculation.
Okay. It's kind of like following a little bit of what I was saying, but taking it a little step further. I think you're right. I mean, he knows where he's headed. He has told his disciples, I'm on this side of the hill now of my mission. It has its end in Jerusalem. I'm headed there to suffer and to die. And he's had the meeting with Moses and Elijah. They've discussed his departure that will take place in Jerusalem, is kind of the way it was expressed in one of the translations. And so I do think his work in Jerusalem has now come up to be the focus. I think that because of that, and he knows where in a sense, the time frame here, that I don't know that I go with you that Satan's trying to divert him. I take it more, Jesus realizes his disciples have got to be 2 more steps further down the road real quick, or however much in their training down the road real quick. That's kind of the way I take it.
Yeah. Well, well, I don't know about diverting Jesus, but we can all have our theories about the work of Satan. Certainly, that's what he wanted to do. But I do think what we have here is a real challenging story about the challenge to the faith of this man, the faith of the disciples, they're confused. We've done this before. Why can't we do it now? So there's lots of questions. A lot of people are struggling, and Jesus is probably the least of them that's struggling. The story is really the challenge of the faith of the Father, in a sense. Once we move on, he says that this has been happening for a while now. His Father says in response to Jesus, and um, but if you can do anything, this has happened. If you can do anything, this has happened. This boy's been suffering like this from childhood. If there's anything you can do, um, some of the commentaries point out that this is kind of a conditional clause. Certainly, Jesus is the last resort. He came to have Jesus. He came to bring the child to Jesus, and the disciples were there. They tried to do something and they couldn't. And so maybe his faith is flagging. It's weak at this moment. He's saying, perhaps, that he is not sure if even Jesus can do anything, right? But he and Jesus seems to address his faith. Faith is a important component, of course, of the Christian life. By faith and repentance, we are saved, and so it seems like faith is the ingredient in many of these healings. God's power is not limited by our faith. Clearly, look what Jesus does, even to the faithless generation. But faith is kind of the main question here. Does this man have faith? Certainly coming and seeing if there is hope, is faith in and of itself. It's faith in action, even if the man's faith is weak and he's not sure. But that's one of the big questions, even for us. We live in an age of doubting, right? And we live in an age where doubt is sort of our primary response to anything. If we hear, and it can be good and bad. We hear the news and we say, well, I'm not sure if that's true. It seems like we believe all the wrong things at the wrong times. When when it comes time to faith and actually believing God's things, we have such difficulty. So I think it's more of a story about us than Jesus. But
Well, I don't disagree, but you will have to agree with me that as we read through the story of the Bible, there is clearly an increase, a very marked increase, at least as far as the Bible tells us about, in the demonic activity when Jesus is engaged in his public ministry, right? Because we read about so many demon possessed, and I don't know if do we even have one story in the Old Testament of a demon possessed person? I don't know. Maybe Saul, you could say.
You have
King
Saul, demon tormented.
but it just seems like there's just this increase, and then we read a little bit in the book of Acts of some demon possessed being set free, but it fades away pretty quickly, and it just seems to me that that's well, I think it's an important part of the whole story to realize, help us remember that what Jesus was facing. I mean, we get a very clear picture in the garden of how much stress and how troubled his soul was with all that was going on, and I think that we see that. But I don't disagree with you. I mean, you're the pastor.
Well, Peter says something I think that's really important. Is that we're given the more sure revelation. We're given the more sure word. And I think what Jesus is doing here, what Mark is doing, and some people say Mark is what the more spiritual, there's more of this like spiritual, fast moving, intense, like action-packed gospel, and this is one of those instances where what's the action? The action is Jesus, the forces of God, which Jesus is God himself, are on the march against the forces of evil. And if this were left out, like it is, it became more situational, like it is in much of the Old Testament. Then we would be missing out on that sort of inside vision of what's going on in the invisible world. And I think that's very much in play here. God was not going to give us the full revelation in the New Testament without giving us that extra deep insight to the spiritual warfare that's really going on here.
Okay.
And I think that's why some Christian sects, seem like they overdo the spiritual aspect, because, well, the New Testament is highly spiritual, right? So that's why you get so much focus on it here.
So, David, let's zero in then on verse 22, because I don't disagree that we have a story about faith, and Jesus is called out a faithless generation, but in the midst of that, we see a measure of faith in the Father, right? I mean, he has enough faith to cry out in his desperate circumstance, have compassion on us and help us. So maybe if you want to pick up
Right.
there at verse 22 with that.
Yeah, I think that what goes on there kind of is a continuation. You just think about this father. He must have heard that Jesus and his disciples were in that area, but when he comes, Jesus isn't there. And so he comes to the disciples and he's wanting to help, and they are unable to help him. And so when Jesus comes and kind of takes command of the situation, and now is interacting directly with the Father, and he asks how long this has been happening. The Father's now accounting. He's probably given that account to the disciples, maybe, or even it's from childhood, and this is what happens, these terrible things. But if you can do anything, to me, it's like I'm hope. He has the hope, but it's a mix with doubt because of what he's faced. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. I think that he realizes it's something that does come from the compassion of Christ. But because he has had the disappointment with the disciples, he probably has some level of doubt, and that's why you have Jesus' response. Jesus puts back to him the conditional question. He said, if you can do anything. And Jesus says, if you can, basically is what he says. Some translations, like the New King James and King James, says, if you can believe. A lot of them just say, if you can. And he's kind of putting it back on the man to get him to, express his faith. Because he goes on and say all things are possible to him who believes. And so he does tie in the necessity that he's asking of the man to believe.
Okay, let's
kind of an interesting interchange there.
Right. So I stopped at verse 22 in my initial reading. So let me pick up and read through verse 29. And then, because I think what you're saying is spot on, but we're going to get to a critical part there, I think verse 24 in this. But once again, reading verse 22, the father of the child speaking here, and often it has cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him that believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help you my unbelief. When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying to him, you dumb and deaf spirit, I charge you, come out of him and enter no more into him. And the spirit cried and rent him severely and came out of him, and he was as one dead, so that many said, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast him out?" And Jesus said to them, "This kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting." All right, so David, if you want to pick up with what you were saying when I cut you off to
Yeah,
the rest of the
I think that that interaction there, in which the father has expressed some of, his faith is crumbling some, and he wants Jesus to be able to help, but he has a weak faith at that point, and Jesus is calling him to a greater faith, and is putting back the same type of, you know, uh, conditional statement of, if you can believe, all things are possible if you, to him who believes. And so that's why I think Jesus is working methodically through this. He has much to teach. And the man comes back with a profession of belief, and it is a pure and simple belief. And he wants, but he knows it's probably incomplete. Okay. Help my unbelief. It's kind of like, when I read that, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. It's not exactly the same thing, but Augustine has that prayer. Lucas probably get it more right than me, but command what you will, and basically help me to do your command. Realizing that we need to receive from Christ what we need to have. And so, yeah, that's where I'll leave it.
Now, but Lucas, I mean, wouldn't you say ultimately, given our nature and our condition, I mean, I guess we talk about growing in faith and our faith strengthening and that sort of thing, and I guess there's a place for that. But I mean, ultimately, all we're left with is calling out on Jesus for his compassion and help, right? I mean, that's all we have, isn't it? And you go ahead and talk about these verses in this interaction as well.
Right. Well, we know this passage is about faith, and is it what is this cry of belief, help my unbelief? This is central to the passage. It's probably one of the most memorable cries in the New Testament. And what I wanted to say was that it really captures the now and not yet. I think it haunts Christians sometimes, and maybe you should be haunted if you're not living like you should obediently before God. But it haunts us sometimes for us to have a faith in God that is not fully formed. And now we have faith, but not yet fully reveal, or not revealed, but not fully matured faith. And what Jesus does here, this whole program, coming to earth, his whole program, and really all of the scriptures. This is how I teach the scriptures. You can almost probably go to almost any sermon that I preach, and it's not just through the life of Abraham, but in a lot of different parts of the Bible, but certainly Genesis. Jesus' main goal, his main motive, his main job is to instill faith in us and to help us to live a life by faith. The just live by faith. It says in it's not Micah, it's Hosea,
Habakkuk.
I think, or Habakkuk.
Yeah.
The just live by faith, and in order to be right with God, to be just before God, even in the Old Testament, it is a matter of faith. Abram believed God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. And that's Genesis 15:6. That's one of the key verses about faith. What does it mean to have your faith accounted as righteousness, as goodness? And so this man, who knows who he is? Is he a scribe? Is he just one of the crowd? Looks like he's just a regular old guy. Has a concept that believing in Jesus is what is required of him. And that's what's going to heal his son. That's the source of healing, is faith. He has his doubts. He's been disappointed. He's had some church hurts. He's been to the churches where these scribes are teaching, and maybe they chased him out when he, came in an unclean manner with their religious rules. But this guy really exemplifies for us what you and I are, in how we can identify with this part of scripture. We believe, in sort of a mental sense, that Jesus is technically capable. I've heard all these great things about you, Jesus, but you know, I don't know if you're able to do this. I've heard you resurrect people, resurrecting children and people and little boys in Mark chapter 5. He's already resurrected people, and actually that's what happens here. We haven't got there yet, but this is Jesus's program. He says to this guy, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And it's not a magic, it's not an e-ticket, it's not a magic trick. God's desire is for us to live lives of faith before him, trusting him, not just mentally, with our whole heart. And that's what he's doing. He's laying his whole heart, he's laying his son at Jesus's feet. That's his whole heart. That's what we're supposed to do.
Right. So you touched on it briefly, but we live in a day and age where there is an abundance of teaching that grabs hold of a verse like 23, maybe takes just the last half of that verse. All things are possible to him that believes. And then they'll take the story and say, here's a man who was believing for the healing of his son, and because he had enough faith, it came to pass. And so whatever you're believing for, if you believe enough, it will come to pass. In fact, some of these who teach such a thing will even teach that in some way God is obligated to fulfill your requests if you have enough faith, enough belief. So Lucas, you've talked about that some. David, maybe I'll throw it on you.
No, that's fine.
This is not what this passage is teaching us. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. Okay, that is absolutely fair to say. When Jesus says all things are possible to him who believes, one of the things that's possible is for somebody to stay strong in the faith when the answer they get isn't the one they actually were praying for, or the answer is no to their prayer. Faith is that God always does things well. And certainly, we look at a healing and restoration of health as something that is well and good, but God works all things out for the good, for those who are love him and are called according to his purposes. And I when I preached on this section, and it's there in my notes, it's obviously in my brain now, and this will be a little bit family personal, especially for you and me, Tim, is, we had an older brother who had MS, and I know Dad said it in your presence. He did it in mine. He says, every day, every day I pray for his healing, right? And Dad never wavered from that. Yet the healing didn't come, at least as we would want it in his lifetime at this, on this earth. Certainly through death and glorification, he's perfectly healthy now. But yeah, it wasn't that Dad and Mom lacked faith. I mean, they were consistent, persistent, and never wavered in it. It was in that case, the answer was no. And because they had true faith, they didn't lose heart because the answer wasn't there. They accepted God's sovereign choice. And those are the things that need to be weighed in this whole thing. It's not, as you said, it's not a magical formula. It's not, if you say it just right or you have it just enough, then God has to do something. But God definitely wants, because we are to be living a life building up our faith more and more to trust in God. I mean, scripturally, you had Timothy that suffered with an ailment of the stomach. Paul didn't say, well, Timothy, you just got to have more faith and you won't have it. He even actually gave him, a medicinal approach to that. You had Paul himself with possibly an eyesight issue, whatever a thorn in the flesh was to him. He sought the Lord persistently, and the Lord said, no, you're gonna overcome it just by your faith in me, and my care for you. You're gonna stay with it. So we see these things, and we got to have a balanced understanding of what this is.
Yeah, and I would say that the
Yeah.
the modern teaching really inverts things, right? And it makes us the sovereign over God if we're going to claim that God somehow becomes
Right.
obligated to us and our performance or whatever. Go ahead, Lucas.
Or, our faith thing. Like, I really prayed seriously and I put my faith in you, God, and you didn't do what I wanted. That's not what faith is. Faith is trusting, like what David said, that God is able to do what he says he's going to do. And he can. This guy says, if you can. Well, faith says, yes, God, you can. That's what faith says. And it's not this. It's not this. There's a pastor in northern Idaho. He literally says, if your child is baptized in faith, because in the Presbyterian world, we believe in baptism of children when they're young, we give them the sign of the covenant by the faith of the parents. So here's the thing, the horrible thing that he said. He says, if your child goes away from the Lord later in life, it's pretty clear evidence that when you were at the baptism, Dad, that your faith wasn't genuine. And so your child is not saved because your faith was not genuine at the baptism. And that is not covenant theology, for one. I just want to make that clear. Anybody listening who leans towards a Reformed theology, please know that is not that is even remotely reminiscent of what covenant theology teaches. But we do believe that the faith of the parent is the faith in which the baby is baptized. Now, Mark 16:16 says, if you are baptized, if you believe, then get baptized. But if you don't believe, then you are damned. And it doesn't matter if you are baptized. So that's a really good, useful text for us to realize that faith is the essential thing, and it is not your sense. It's not, faith is not based on your emotional sense of like how strong you want God to do something. It's based on God's goodness itself. It's based on an infallible grounds. It's based on a grounds that gives you the most assurance, not your simple desiring of it, which can be here today and gone tomorrow. If you're a parent of a child with a disability, you could just grow used to it and say, you know what, I don't even think about it anymore. It's just so routine to me, and I don't even think about praying for healing anymore. Like I have a daughter with Down syndrome. I don't think of praying for her. It's just something that I accept. This man has a kid with literally a disability from his youth, but he's bringing him to Jesus. It'd almost be like me bringing my daughter with Down syndrome to Jesus. Like he has no basis to believe that this man would be able to, or why he would heal his son. And it's a remarkable thing that he even comes And if he comes with a mixture of doubt and faith, it's still a precious thing. Jesus wants to encourage and grow his faith. Um, I see the even the plea. The man says, "Please just have compassion on us." Yeah, what a touching addition. Um, for if no other reason, Lord, just because you are compassionate. That is the kind of faith in knowing that Jesus works out of love and compassion. That's a wonderful testimony that he knows who Jesus is.
In my Wednesday night live stream, we've been reading through B.B. Warfield's Emotional Life of Our Lord. And in that, he says that compassion is the most often attributed emotion to Jesus. And he goes through a wonderful exploration of that compassion and how there are points at which it even shows up more passionately than other points, and that there's an actual suffering that Jesus experiences. So I think that all of us need to call out for the compassion of Jesus throughout our days. I mean, I think that's our only hope of getting through some of the troubles and difficulties in this life is that we know his compassion, that he really knows what it is to suffer in this earth. He suffered even to a point that we can't even imagine. And so he's lived those kind of days for us. And so that is, I think, really a special part of this story. Okay, so in verse 25, apparently they were with the father and the child and Jesus, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. There was some separation between them and the general crowd at that point, because it says Jesus saw that the people came running together. And when he saw that, then he does this rebuking. And so it kind of makes it sound like his act of rebuking the foul spirit was somehow connected with suddenly the people are running at them. I'm not sure if that's significant or whatever. But he speaks these words, and then there's like one last effort by this demonic spirit to do damage to the boy, it seems. But even its effort to, I don't know, maybe even attempt to kill the boy at that point is not going to be sufficient in the presence of Jesus. So we're probably kind of pressing here, David, but if you want to maybe look at verses 25 through 27 and just give some comments there.
Okay. Yeah. I guess we'd have to say it has some significance that he saw the people coming together, running together, and why they had distanced themselves, I don't know. Maybe because of the first time that the demon threw the child down so dramatically and he gnashed his teeth and so forth. Maybe they kind of were a little, thought about the horror of it or reacted to it and drew back. And now they're willing to come back over, and probably with the crowd coming, Jesus realizes his interaction with the Father is going to be interrupted, but also it's time, it's time to deal with the situation. And he does rebuke the unclean spirit. He identifies it as deaf and dumb and commands it to come out of him and enter him no more. Okay, it's not going to be able to come back into him. And as you said, the convulsion and such that takes place there, it's like one last dramatic move before he exits. The child lays as if dead, I'm sure, if, just the physical exertion of being forced around and thrown around might be part of it. I don't know. But he was completely still. They thought he was dead, but Jesus takes him by the hand and raises him up. And the indication is he is fine. And all Jesus' healings are complete. And this one is as well. It's maybe even be pictorial of the fact that we're all dead in sin. We're all subject to the powers of, the father of lies in our lives. And in a sense, we're all dead. But when Jesus compassionately comes to us, the evil must go, the life is given, and he takes our hand and he, in a sense, raises us up from the dead in a spiritual sense. So you can't see that picture in this as well.
Lucas, I'll give you last words here as we conclude this episode.
Well, the Greek word ageros, to raise up, as if to awake from sleep or even to resurrect. And so I think we can maybe take it in that sense that there is resurrection life. The crowd running together, I think it just makes sense to think of it as the crowd was growing and more people were running. Probably, he's doing it, the kid. There might be a miracle. There might be an an exorcism. Certainly enough time is passing. There's a little bit of a conversation, and people could be just coming kind of out of the woodwork, if you will. And so, Jesus seems to be aware of the crowds and certainly thought it was uh, preferable to not wait until the crowds were pressing in to do the work. But his words of building up, I think, had already taken hold, and it was time for him to take the child by the hand, lift him up, and he arose. I mean, it just seems like the same sort of tender, compassionate God who takes you by the hand. He's done this many times. He takes the man. I can't remember. Didn't he take him by the hand and go out of the town? The guy who was blind.
Yeah.
And Jesus takes people by the hand. I can't remember the last time, maybe child, but the last time a pastor like took me by the hand and like gently led me in a way to talk to me sort of in private. um as a pastor, I think about these things. I was like, how am I like Jesus to my people? And Jesus is just such a wonderful shepherd. We can all do a better job of being better shepherds to his people. And he's such a great and wonderful God.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there for this episode, and we can revisit the final moments of this event as Jesus delivers this boy from this demon, and we can do that next week, Lord willing, as we continue our series of exploring a sketchbook of Christ. And we hope that you'll join us. I guess I should have had this up earlier, but do the whole like and subscribe thing, and leave comments below. We would love to hear your comments. Any questions you might have, give us an opportunity to even be more direct in how we're speaking about these things, to what things you are thinking about as you watch through these videos. So we appreciate you joining us, watching at a later time. We hope it's been instructive and informative for you. We hope all of us are coming to know and love our Savior and Christ even more as we continue to explore this sketchbook of Christ. So please join us next week for another episode of Lantern's Quest, exploring a sketchbook of Christ.